Chapter 18 of Assorted Events in which the plot thickens thicker. As soon as the wheels rattled on cobbled streets, Jimmy felt an immense sense of relief. This was his turf, the city, and he knew more places to hide than a rat. Approaching the waterside fairgrounds, he saw prisoners in chains being marched aboard a convict ship. It lay in sharp contrast to the festive stalls and banners of the fair. Captain Nips eased the coach between a seller of live fowl and a juggler tossing colored balls into the bright noonday air. "Thanks for the jolly ride, Hot Potato Man," said Betsy. "Come along, Petunia. Let's fetch us a crowd and earn a copper or two." Jimmy collected his battered birdcage. "Don't rush off, lad," said Captain Nips, hauling out a canvas load of firewood from under the seat. "Ain't I been listening to your stomach bumbling for the last hour? Do me the kindness of filling the kettle at the pump. Soon as the potatoes are boiled up, we'll feast, eh?" Anxious as he was to be on his way, Jimmy hesitated. He was powerful hungry. Then Captain Nips laid a coin in his hand, "And while you're at it, stop off at the cow lady, the both of you, and get yourselves a couple of mugs of drink." Jimmy picked up the handle of the kettle, but almost at once Prince Brat snatched it out of his hands. "I'll do that." "You?" Jimmy replied. "It's servant's work." "Then who'd take me for a prince toting water?" He smiled. He laughed. "I've never been allowed to carry anything, not in my entire life." Jimmy led the way. He'd never regarded fetching and carrying as a privilege. Princes and such like were hard to fathom, but the sound of merriment lingered in his head. He'd never before heard Prince Brat laugh. They dodged acrobats, and a stilt walker, and a harp player. Through the hubbub came a great squeaky voice. "Jimmy! Rat-catching Jimmy!" Turning, Jimmy spied a tall boy wearing a checked cap. It was Smudge, tending a sawdust pit squared off by a board fence, a dog and rat pit. Beside him stood a stack of rat-filled cages and a black terrier leashed to a post. "By gigs, it is you, Jimmy," said Smudge. "Reckon you can call the king by his first name these days?" "Hello, Smudge. You give up mud-larking?" "I've come up in the world, ain't I? Same as you." "Jimmy, how do you like my dog? Best rat fighter you ever saw." With a practiced eye, Jimmy surveyed the cages. "But those rats look tame enough to eat off your hand." "Best I could afford. Catch me some castle rats and I'll make a special feature. The king's own rats." "Not my line of work in the castle, Smudge. It's not true you're whipping boy? Is it?" Jimmy felt a flush of embarrassment and dodged the question. "I've learned to read and write." "Naw. The bottom truth. I've read many a book from beginning to end." "What's in 'em?" "All nature of things. I can do sums, too." Smudge was impressed. "Ain't that a wonder? I never heard of a rat catcher could read and write and do sums. It don't fit. Don't forget old friends when you grow up to be the Duke or something." "I aim to get back to the sewers," replied Jimmy stiffly. "I'll catch you some rats first chance." But even as he said it, Jimmy felt a bleak discomfort. He would miss the shelves of books he'd left behind in the castle. In the sewers, he hadn't been aware of his own ignorance. He saw no choice now but to return, but he realized that he'd lost his taste for ignorance. Smudge was saying, "Who's the cove?" "What?" "Your pal." "This is—" Jimmy caught himself. He began to stammer. "This is—" The prince answered for him. "Friendo Jimmy's the name." "Then Friendo Jimmy'll do." Smudge put out his hand to shake. Jimmy caught Prince Brat's momentary confusion. He never shakes hands. "Of course I do," said the prince with a quick grin. He took Smudge's hand. "Glad to shake your hand, Smudge." "Likewise," said Jimmy. Likewise. And Jimmy dragged the prince away. Smudge had committed a terrible offense. No one was allowed to shake hands with the prince. "Why did you do that?" "Because I've never shaken hands before." He could be hung for less. The prince was staring at his hand. It felt friendly, trusting. "I may introduce the practice at court when I become king." Jimmy's ears pricked up. "King, is it?" he thought. "So it was just bluster that you might never go back to the castle. Gaw, I hope you don't want to learn to catch rats first." Moments later they came to a stout old woman, with hands as gnarled as tree roots. Beside her, munching grass, stood a cow with a brass ring in its nose. "New milk," the cow lady called out. "New milk, fresh from the cow. Best in the land. New milk." Jimmy handed over the coin. The milk lady fished 2 mugs out of a tub of water, sat on a stool, and began to milk the cow directly into the mugs. Her aim was as skilled as an archer's. "Have you ever heard the earful?" she asked. "Our prince has been abducted." I think that means abducted. Imagine, the prince replied coolly. She was looking directly at him. "Our darling poor king," she went on, weeping his royal eyes out, no doubt. Though why he'd spring a tear for that little toad, I don't know. A mighty terror, they say, is Prince Brat. Pity us the day he becomes king, eh? She handed over the pair of mugs. Jimmy drank the warm milk down in unbroken gulps. But then he noticed the prince standing motionless, a vague, unseeing look in his eyes. For certain he knew everyone called him Prince Brat behind his back, didn't he? "Drink up, lad," said the cow lady. "My stars, I've never seen such rags on a boy. They look like cast-offs from the old clothes man." She gave out a joking laugh. "Drink up before you scare off business." The prince drained the mug and shuffled away. As they filled the potato kettle at the pump, he looked at Jimmy. Treasonous old woman, I could have her tongue ripped out for lying. But there was no steam in his voice. Taking a whipping was bad enough, but to learn that his subjects dreaded the day he'd grow up and become king had deeply shaken him. "She meant no harm," Jimmy murmured, keeping his eyes alert for soldiers. "Is that what they call me, Prince Brat?" Jimmy nodded. "Does everyone hate me?" "More'n likely. What about you?" Jimmy hesitated for a moment. "I did, but maybe I don't." Jimmy couldn't sort out his feelings. "The pot's full, let's go." It took the 2 of them to carry the iron kettle now full of water. They passed a magician with a bald head, a street fiddler, and an umbrella seller. His wares opened around his feet like black silken mushrooms. Suddenly there loomed up a soldier on horseback, his eyes on the search. There was nothing to do but brazen it out. Jimmy took a tighter grip on the handle, but was ready to fly if he had to. The soldier passed by with only the merest glance. What was he looking for? A prince in fine velvets and a crown cocked on his head? Was it clothes that made a prince, Jimmy wondered, just as rags made a street boy? He had a notion that the prince felt secretly disappointed not to be recognized by any of his subjects. Wasn't he getting his head stuffed with surprises? Before long, potatoes were boiling in the pot. Not far off, Betsy had drawn a crowd with Petunia, now balancing a gentleman's hat on his nose, and then the bear began passing the hat for tips. Jimmy no longer felt the slightest concern about the soldiers. He had no doubt that Hold-Your-Nose Billy would trace him and the prince to the fair. Hadn't they fallen into the company of a girl with a trained bear? Where else would she be going? Finally, Captain Nips began spearing boiled potatoes, and Betsy returned with Petunia. "We could eat a bushel," she exclaimed, jingling a handful of coins. "Courtesy to fellow artistes," said Captain Nips, refusing the money. He split open a pair of plump potatoes. "Salt and pepper?" "Pepper for me, salt for Petunia." Captain Nips reached into one coat pocket for a pinch of salt, and in the other for pepper. "Salt for me," said Jimmy. "And you?" Captain Nips asked the prince. The heir to the throne balked for a moment, and Jimmy knew why. He'd certainly never eaten a potato before. In the castle, roots were regarded as peasant food. I don't know," the prince stammered. "When in doubt, salt," chuckled Captain Nips. And then he began calling out to the passing crowd, "Hot, hot, hot potatoes! Captain Nips's hot, hot potatoes!" Jimmy gorged himself, anxious to be off and not certain when he would eat again. The prince nibbled at first with his fingers, and then threw his royal pride to the winds. He bit off the whole mouthfuls. A ballad seller was working his way through the crowd, crying out his wares. He waved a bamboo pole with long paper streamers fluttering from the tip. 3 yards of songs, a copper. Old songs, new songs, sing 'em yourself. 10 verses of poor pitiful Polly will make you weep. 16 verses of that notable highwayman, Hold-Your-Nose Billy. Jimmy's ears pricked up as the ballad seller began singing a sample of his merchandise. Hold-Your-Nose Billy, a wild man is he, hanging from a gallows tree. Here he comes, there he goes, don't forget to hold your nose. The street song had once amused Jimmy, but now he only sharpened his eyes. He wiped his hands on his sleeves and turned to Captain Nips. "Thanks for the grub, sir." "Where are you off to?" asked Betsy. "Here's the place to put a jingle in your pockets. Can't you turn cartwheels or something?" "I catch rats," Jimmy said simply. "Rats?" Betsy made a face. "What on earth for?" There's good money in sewer rats. The meaner, the better." "My eyes!" exclaimed Betsy. "Don't you get bit?" "Many a time," said Jimmy. Captain Nips cocked an ear. "What's that running patterer yelling about?" A crow-like voice pierced the air, and then the news seller appeared, his tongue wagging like a bell clapper, a bundle of broadsides under his arm. "Print sold to gypsies, the true and genuine facts. Ink still wet. Whipping boy charged with this dastardly scheme. King offers reward for the unspeakable rascal. Dead or alive. Full description. Get your copy. Keep your eyes peeled and catch the reward." The running patterer was selling his broadsides almost as fast as he could yell. The facts were cockeyed, but Jimmy grabbed his birdcage, backed off, and was gone. Whew, that was a long chapter.